He is a Navy SEAL, forged in the harshest conditions of the ocean and military discipline. His friend is just as capable, but always willing to set everything else aside to be the one who finishes first. On a freezing winter night, the sea forced them to face a choice no training could prepare them for. Years later, fate brought them face to face again, not as soldiers competing, but as men remembering who they became. Because real strength isn't proven by winning, it's revealed when you choose to turn back. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The northern beach wore its morning-like armor, bright, cold, and honest. Pale winter sunlight stretched across the sea in thin, gleaming ribbons, turning every wave into a blade of moving steel. Wind came off the water with the patience of an old god. Not cruel, not kind, simply certain. The air smelled of salt, iron, and pine from the dark tree line beyond the dunes. Even the gulls sounded restrained, as if they, too, understood that this coast did not reward foolish noise. Ethan Walker moved along the shoreline without hurry. At 35, he stood a little over 6 feet, the kind of tall that didn't ask to be noticed and still was. His body was lean and compact, strength packed efficiently, built for endurance and sudden decisions, not display. He carried himself with a calm discipline that never fully leaves men forged under orders, even after they stop wearing the uniform. His face was clean-shaven. No beard, no softness to hide behind. A square jaw and defined cheekbones showed clearly, giving him a severe, almost carved quality that the wind had softened over time. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a military style, just slightly longer than regulation, as if that single inch was his quiet way of saying he belonged to no one now but his own conscience. His eyes were gray-blue and steady, the kind that watched without judging, the kind that had seen enough to doubt certainty. He wore what he always wore, a faded olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years and lightly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. Old combat pants in a muted earth brown and moss green blend, knees worn thin, cargo pockets sagging slightly from long habit, scratched military work boots pressed into damp sand. An old military watch sat on his wrist, its face nicked and dulled, still keeping time like a loyal friend who never asked questions. Beside him walked Rook. The German shepherd was 5 years old, black and tan, broad-backed and powerful, his dark coat like wet stone, and his legs and chest of burnished gold. He moved with quiet confidence, head low, ears alert, amber-brown eyes scanning water and sky, as if reading a language humans forgot at birth. A simple black leather collar circled his neck. No tags, no nameplate. Nothing that said, pet. Rook wasn't a pet. Rook was a compass. Ethan had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own thoughts. Thoughts argued. Thoughts negotiated with danger. Rook did neither. Rook simply knew. They walked like this often, man and dog tracing the thin boundary where land surrendered to ocean. For Ethan, the routine was a kind of prayer. The sea didn't ask him to explain why he'd stepped away from the life that once defined him. It didn't care who he used to be. It demanded only attention, and it paid out consequences with strict fairness. Today felt like any other day, until it didn't. Rook stopped. Not in a startled way. No skid of paws, no frantic bark. It was worse than panic. It was certainty. The dog's body went rigid, muscles coiling beneath thick fur. His ears rose, turning toward the open water. A low sound vibrated in his chest, neither growl nor whine, but something older, something that said, "Look." Ethan slowed, following Rook's line of sight. At first, there was nothing. Only waves breaking hard, retreating, returning again. The horizon was bright and distant. The cold sun made it difficult to see shapes against the glare. Then faintly, barely more than a tear in the rhythm of the surf, came a sound that did not belong. A voice. It rose, cracked, and vanished between crashing waves, as if the ocean itself was trying to swallow it before the world could hear. Help! Ethan's pulse didn't race. It sharpened. Rook broke into motion, sprinting along the shoreline, barking now, urgent, directional, not fear, focus. Ethan was already moving. He ran, boots striking wet sand with blunt authority. He shrugged off his outer layer without looking down, letting the wind take it like an offering. Far out beyond the break, a dark shape bobbed erratically between swells. Then another. Two figures, maybe three, caught in water that didn't forgive hesitation. No lifeguard towers, no rescue boards, no easy heroics, only cold, heavy waves and distance. Ethan entered the water without a second thought. The sea hit him like a fist, stealing breath, biting into muscle, and demanding discipline. His body responded the way it had been trained to respond. Controlled inhale, efficient stroke, no wasted motion. He dove under a breaking wave, surfaced, oriented, and pushed forward with long, steady strokes. Rook plunged in beside him. The dog swam with powerful, practiced movements, front paws cutting the water, head held high, eyes locked on the struggle ahead. He didn't thrash. He didn't waste energy. He swam like a creature built for purpose. And then Ethan saw something that tightened the story into a knot. Another swimmer. A man was already in the water, closer to the struggling figures, moving with unmistakable economy. Precise strokes, controlled breathing, body aligned like a weapon. That wasn't luck. That was training. Ethan adjusted his angle slightly, converging. As he closed the distance, Ethan's mind did what it always did in moments like this. It became quiet, not empty, focused. The past wasn't allowed to speak when people were drowning. The past could wait. The sea would not. They reached the victims almost at the same time. Two adults, both exhausted, one barely conscious. Their faces were pale with fear and cold. Panic had already stolen most of their strength. The current tugged at them with relentless patience, as if the ocean had all day to win. No words passed between the two rescuers. None were needed. The other man secured the heavier victim, locking an arm beneath the shoulders with practiced precision, keeping the head above water. Ethan took the second victim, controlling an arm, keeping the airway clear, timing movements with the waves instead of fighting them. Rook positioned himself behind the victims, his solid body acting as a floating barrier against a swell that threatened to roll them under. A wave rose like a wall. Ethan angled the victim's body, braced his own, and let the force carry them sideways rather than straight back. It was the kind of calculation that looked like instinct to anyone watching and felt like mathematics in the bones. In the midst of it, Rook did something strange. The dog barked once, sharp, commanding, then abruptly stopped barking and swam closer to Ethan's shoulder, pressing his body against Ethan's side for a heartbeat. It wasn't support the way a dog might cling in fear. It was contact that felt intentional, like a signal, like a reminder. For an instant, Ethan's mind flickered with an unwanted thought, half superstitious, half true. Some instincts are older than training. A wave slammed into them hard enough to steal Ethan's breath. And in that single breathless second, Rook turned his head, not toward the victims, not toward shore, but toward the open sea, staring into the distance with an intensity that made Ethan's skin go cold. It was as if the dog wasn't only saving lives in front of him, but listening for something else behind the waves. Ethan forced his lungs to work again. He didn't let the thought take shape. He couldn't. Not yet. They moved. Stroke by stroke, the three of them, 2 men and 1 shepherd built from muscle and purpose, fought their way toward shore. The victims clung weakly, their bodies heavy with cold. The shoreline grew closer in fragments. Foam, sand, the darker line of dunes. People appeared. A small group ran toward the waterline. Bystanders wrapped in winter jackets, faces pinched with fear. One woman, mid-30s, short and sturdy with dark hair tucked under a knit cap, held a phone in trembling hands, calling for help, voice too high with panic. A teenage boy with freckles and a red scarf hovered beside her, eyes wide and helpless, as if the world had suddenly demanded adulthood and he wasn't ready. Then the professionals arrived. 2 EMTs sprinted down from the dunes, moving with sharp efficiency. The first, Claire Bennett, was tall and narrow-shouldered. Dark hair pulled into a practical knot beneath her cap. Her face was pale from the cold, eyes quick and steady, competence worn like a second uniform. The second, Tom Alvarez, was stockier, with a beard flecked with gray. His movements fast, despite his size, carrying blankets and a medical bag like he'd done this too many winters to count. "On the sand? Now!" Claire called, voice firm enough to cut through chaos. Ethan and the other rescuer dragged the victims into the shallows. Wet sand scraped beneath Ethan's boots. Rook hauled himself out of the water and shook violently, spraying cold seawater in a wide arc. A bystander yelped, jumping back. Tom glanced at the soaked crowd and muttered, not unkindly, "Congratulations, everybody. Your baptism is complete." It was the smallest humor, but it cracked the tension just enough for people to breathe again. Claire dropped to her knees beside the victims, checking pulse and breathing with quick, practiced hands. Tom wrapped thermal blankets around shaking bodies, his voice softer now, coaxing them back into the world. "He's alive," Claire said, relief slipping through her professionalism. "Hypothermic, but alive." Ethan stepped back. Water dripped from his clothes. Cold settled deep into his bones. He watched the victims' chests rise and fall. Watched the medics work. Watched the bystanders' fear turn slowly into gratitude. It would be easy, too easy, to let that gratitude become something he needed. Ethan had learned not to need it. He looked toward the other rescuer. The man was about Ethan's age, broad-shouldered, powerful without bulk. Wet hair clung to his forehead. His face was hard to read from this distance, features angular, posture controlled, as if even standing still required discipline. He breathed slowly, eyes scanning the shoreline, as if danger might arrive late. For a moment, Ethan wondered who he was. Then Rook trotted back to Ethan's side and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's thigh, not anxious, not begging, anchoring. The medics loaded the victims onto a stretcher. The ambulance waited near the dunes, engine idling like a restless beast. Ethan's hands were no longer needed. That was enough. He turned to leave, stepping away from the cluster of relief and noise, letting the wind reclaim him. He took 3 steps. A hand clapped down hard on his shoulder from behind. Instinct took over. Ethan pivoted, fast, precise, his body moving before thought could interfere. His hand seized the wrist, his stance lowered, his grip tightened with controlled force, ready to break what needed breaking if the world demanded it. Rook's ears snapped up. His posture shifted, still, alert, coiled. The beach seemed to hold its breath. And the sea behind them rolled on, indifferent and exact, as if it had always known this moment would come. Because fate, Ethan realized in the space of a heartbeat, did not always call people by name. Sometimes it called them by instinct. The hand on Ethan Walker's shoulder should have been harmless. On any normal morning, on any ordinary beach, a touch like that would have meant gratitude, or a stranger asking if everything was okay, or someone wanting to talk about the weather the way people did when they didn't know what to do with silence. But Ethan's body did not live in ordinary. It lived in reflex. He pivoted with clean precision, catching the wrist, turning it, folding the arm, the way a lock closes around a door, fast enough that the wind didn't have time to change its mind. The man behind him hissed, half pain, half surprise. A low, steady sound rose behind Ethan. Rook. Not a bark, not panic. A warning that carried the weight of an oath. Easy, the man said through clenched teeth, and somehow his voice carried amusement, as if being nearly dislocated was just another old joke. Still quick. Still dangerous. Ethan froze. The words hit him like the scent of smoke. Familiar, unwanted, undeniable. He released the hold slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the stranger's face the way sailors watch the horizon, expecting storms even when skies were clear. The man straightened, rolling his shoulder as if testing how much of himself still worked, then smiled. Not warm, not cruel, measured. A smile sharpened to a point. Lucas Reed stood in front of him. Up close, the years had carved him differently than memory did. Lucas was tall and powerfully built, broad through the shoulders, strength packed tight beneath damp fabric, the way a blade hid in its sheath. His hair was cut short and dark, and there was stubble on his jaw. Not the careful kind, but the careless kind, as if sleep had become optional and grooming had stopped winning arguments. His eyes were darker than Ethan's, restless and assessing, always calculating distance. Between men, between outcomes, between who stood first and who stood second. A faint scar traced along his forearm, pale and clean, like a signature written by winter. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, the ocean roaring behind them like a witness that refused to speak. "You shouldn't sneak up on people," Ethan said at last. Lucas's grin widened a fraction. "You shouldn't be so easy to find." Behind them, Claire Bennett and Tom Alvarez were finishing the handoff to the ambulance crew. Claire's movements were brisk and efficient, dark hair tucked tight beneath her cap, face composed the way professionals wore composure as armor. Tom, stockier and bearded, tossed a thermal blanket over one of the shivering victims with the casual tenderness of a man who had learned that jokes and blankets were both forms of rescue. When Tom glanced over and saw Ethan's stance, shoulders angled, weight balanced, he made a small sound of appreciation. "Whoever touched you," Tom muttered, "owes your shoulder an apology." Lucas heard it and laughed softly. "Tell it to my elbow." Ethan didn't laugh. He simply watched Lucas the way men watched an old map, recognizing the landmarks, noticing the new damage. Rook padded forward, water still clinging to his coat in dark, heavy bands. The German shepherd stopped just short of Lucas, head slightly lowered, ears pricked. His amber-brown eyes did not blink. Lucas raised both hands, palms open, an exaggerated gesture of innocence. "Hey, big guy, I'm not the enemy." Rook did not move. Ethan's mouth twitched. Barely. He doesn't respond to speeches. Lucas studied the dog, like the dog was an exam question with only one correct answer. "He always stare like that?" "Only when he's deciding," Ethan said. The word hung between them. Deciding, as if even fate needed a second opinion. The ambulance doors closed. The siren rose, then faded into the wind. The beach began to exhale, the crowd thinning the way fear always did once it realized it wouldn't be fed. Ethan turned slightly, angling his body toward the open shoreline. Not leaving, not staying, simply placing himself where he could see both Lucas and the sea. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked. Lucas shrugged. Casual, but his shoulders stayed tight. "Same thing you were doing. Walking, breathing, pretending the ocean's not a problem." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You didn't swim out there because you were walking." Lucas's smile sharpened again. There it was, the old habit. Turning everything into a contest even when the prize was nothing but pride. "I heard someone yell," Lucas said. "I moved." "And you reached them first." Lucas tilted his head, pleased at the observation. Still counting. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence was his way of not giving Lucas a trophy. They began walking along the shoreline together, the wet sand dark beneath their boots. The sun sat higher now, bright but cold, and the waves hit the shore with blunt authority, like a judge that never grew tired. Lucas fell into step, as if he belonged there, as if he had always belonged beside Ethan. That was the trick of old bonds. They didn't ask permission when they returned. "You look quieter," Lucas said after a moment. Ethan glanced at him. "That's supposed to be an insult?" Lucas's lips quirked. "No, just surprising." Ethan's gaze returned to the horizon. "The world gets loud when you stop running toward it." Lucas snorted. "And you stopped running. Of course you did." Ethan didn't deny it. He watched Rook instead. The dog paced between them now, occasionally drifting closer to Ethan's knee, then drifting back toward the open water, always measuring, always listening. Lucas noticed. "He's glued to you." "He's trained," Ethan said. Lucas's eyes flicked toward Rook's collar. "Not government issued." "No." Lucas let that sit, then asked quietly, "So what are you now?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The question wasn't rude. It was worse. It was familiar. "I'm here," Ethan said. "That's enough." Lucas laughed once, short and sharp. "You always did know how to make peace sound like a mission statement." Ethan glanced at Lucas's forearm. The scar was clearer in sunlight. A long, pale line that looked too clean to be accidental. A mark of something that had bitten deep and been stitched back together without asking permission. Lucas followed Ethan's gaze and rolled his sleeve up without being asked, as if the scar had been waiting for its cue. "Winter water still makes it itch," Lucas said, tapping the mark with 2 fingers. "Every time it gets cold, it feels like it's reminding me." "Of what?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. Lucas's smile softened, just a fraction. "Of you." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted, subtle as a tide turning. Lucas kept talking, as if words were a rope he could throw across distance. "Back then, you and me, we were the 2 brightest candidates in the team." He said it like a fact, not a boast. Everyone saw it. Instructors pretended not to, but they watched us more, paired us more. Ethan's eyes stayed forward. "You always liked being watched." Lucas's grin returned, and for a moment the beach felt less cold. Yeah, guilty. Then the grin faltered, replaced by something sharper. And you, Lucas continued, you always looked like you didn't care. Like winning was just incidental. It was, Ethan said. Lucas let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except it didn't carry humor. That's what made it worse. Ethan looked at him then, really looked. The lines at the corners of Lucas's eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands opened and closed once, as if memory still lived in the tendons. You came here for a reason, Ethan said. Lucas's gaze flicked away toward the water, then back. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But when I saw you move out there, when you didn't hesitate, Ethan cut him off. You're doing it again. Lucas blinked. Doing what? Measuring, Ethan said. Comparing. Lucas's mouth tightened. Habit. A bad one, Ethan replied. Lucas's eyes flashed. Then he forced a smile over it, the way he always had. Friendly on the surface. Competitive beneath. A mask polished so well, it almost looked like a face. Fine, Lucas said lightly. No comparing, just talking. Rook stopped. Not because of the sea, because of Lucas. The dog stepped closer, slow and deliberate, and sniffed near Lucas's forearm. The scar, the salt water, the story written into skin. Rook's ears lifted higher, his posture rigid in a way that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with judgment. Lucas went still. For the first time, the restless confidence in him paused, as if he'd reached a cliff edge and realized he couldn't argue with gravity. Rook held the sniff for one long second, then looked up at Lucas with unblinking focus. Lucas swallowed. What is that? Ethan watched the dog, feeling the quiet warning in his chest. He remembers patterns. Lucas's voice dropped. I'm not here to start anything. You don't have to, Ethan said. Some things start on their own. Rook suddenly stepped between the two men, shoulders squared, body calm but absolute. Then turned his head toward Ethan and gave a single, low huff. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a verdict, like the dog was saying, this one still carries the storm. Lucas noticed it too. His smile didn't fully return afterward. They walked on, the wind tugging at their wet clothes, the sun bright enough to look hopeful and cold enough to remind them hope always had a price. Lucas spoke again, quieter this time. I wasn't easy back then. Ethan gave a small nod. No. Lucas's laugh came out breathy, self-aware. You always were good at saying a lot with one syllable. Ethan's gaze stayed on the coastline ahead. You came here as if nothing happened. Lucas's jaw worked. I came here because something happened. Ethan slowed. What? Lucas's eyes darted toward the sea again, then back. When I saw you today, it felt like the ocean was circling back, like it wanted to remind me of who I used to be. Ethan stared at him, expression controlled. And who were you? Lucas's smile returned, but it carried fatigue now. The guy who had to be first. And now? Ethan asked. Lucas hesitated, just long enough to matter. I don't know, he admitted. A gull cried overhead, and the sound was lonely in a way that made the heart feel too large for the body. Ethan looked down at Rook. The dog walked steady at his side, calm again, but still watchful, as if he knew that a reunion could be a gift or a knife, depending on how it was held. Ethan lifted his eyes to Lucas. Why did you touch my shoulder like that? Ethan asked. Lucas blinked, then gave a small, almost sheepish smile. Because I wanted to know if you were still you. And? Ethan said. Lucas's eyes held his. That restless measuring fire flickered, then dimmed. "Yeah," Lucas said softly. "You're still you." Ethan's voice stayed even. "And you're still racing." Lucas exhaled, a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. "Maybe." Rook's tail swung once, slow and deliberate, like punctuation. Ethan turned slightly toward the dunes, toward the path that led away from the shoreline and back into whatever counted as normal. Lucas stayed close, not quite beside him, not quite behind him, like two lines that once ran parallel and now didn't know where they were going. The beach remained bright. The sea remained indifferent. And between the crash of waves, Ethan could feel it. Friendship hadn't shattered, but trust had cracked. And a cracked thing, if handled poorly, could cut. The training compound rose from the northern wilderness like a deliberate wound. Concrete and steel cut into snow and stone, sharp lines refusing to soften no matter how long winter lingered. Pines stood at a distance, tall and silent, their dark needles heavy with frost, as if they had learned long ago not to watch too closely what happened inside the wire. Ethan Walker remembered the cold before he remembered anything else. Not the kind that burned and passed, but the kind that stayed, settling into bone, threading itself through muscle, teaching the body that breath was something to be rationed. Winter here was not an inconvenience. It was curriculum. Back then, Ethan was younger, already tall, already lean. His body was shaped by repetition rather than vanity, strength built efficiently, without excess. His face was clean-shaven even then, jaw squared, cheekbones sharp, features calm to the point of severity. He didn't speak much. When he did, his words arrived measured, stripped of ornament. Men listened, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence suggested he was already listening to them. Beside him, often too close for comfort, was Lucas Reed. Lucas had always looked like a man meant to lead from the front. Broad-shouldered, powerful, his movements carried confidence that bordered on challenge. His hair was cut tight to his scalp, perpetually regulation short, as if he feared that even a millimeter of excess might slow him down. By the end of each day, stubble shadowed his jaw, giving him a perpetually sharpened look. His eyes burned with hunger, not cruelty, not malice, but an unrelenting refusal to be second. They were the two brightest candidates in the class. Everyone knew it. The instructors never said it aloud, but the structure of training betrayed the truth. Ethan and Lucas were paired more often than chance allowed, watched more closely, pushed harder. When drills were designed to break men, they were placed side by side, as if the compound itself wanted to see which one would crack first. Lucas thrived on it. Ethan endured. Overseeing them all was Commander Grant Holloway. Holloway was a tall, iron-framed man in his late 50s, posture unyielding despite the years. His hair was silvered close to the scalp, his face carved with deep lines earned from weather, command, and consequence. His eyes were pale and exacting, the kind that did not miss details and did not forgive excuses. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. When Holloway spoke, men listened because they sensed weight behind every word. Holloway believed in pressure. He believed that war did not forgive hesitation, that the battlefield did not pause to allow mercy to catch its breath. But there was something else in his gaze, something older than doctrine. Knowledge earned the hard way. Ethan noticed it. Lucas did not. When the water exercise was announced, the sky was the color of bone. Snow drifted lightly, disguising the violence of the cold beneath its calm descent. Beyond the compound, the sea lay dark and restless, waves striking rock with methodical force, as if practicing the same lesson over and over. 200 meters. No rest. No assistance. Full gear. Men shifted uneasily as straps were tightened and breath fogged the air. Some masked their nerves better than others. Lucas smiled. "This is where it breaks," he muttered to Ethan, cinching his harness. "Or proves something." Ethan said nothing. He was watching the water, not the distance, but the rhythm. The way the surface moved unpredictably, refusing to settle into a pattern. They entered together. The cold struck instantly, a physical blow that stole breath and demanded discipline. Training took over. Controlled strokes, steady cadence, awareness of space and bodies around them. The world narrowed to movement and breath and the relentless pull of the sea. Halfway through, Ethan sensed it before he saw it. A man to his left, Private Mark Sullivan, younger than most, broad-faced with nervous eyes, began to falter. His kick lost coordination. His breathing turned ragged, sharp gasps slicing through the water. Panic bloomed. Ethan saw Lucas see it too. For a brief moment, their eyes met beneath the surface, two stars crossing paths. Lucas looked away. He surged forward, jaw set, stroke tightening, pushing for distance. Ethan hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he turned. He reached Sullivan just as the man's movements became erratic, arms flailing uselessly. Ethan hooked an arm beneath Sullivan's chest, kicking hard to keep them both afloat, forcing his own breathing steady even as strength bled away. It cost him momentum, strength, time. When they reached the finish, Ethan was shaking violently, teeth clenched to stop them from chattering. Sullivan was hauled from the water by medics, pale but alive. Lucas stood already on shore, chest heaving, eyes blazing with something like victory. Commander Holloway watched them both. He raised a hand. Enough. The exercise ended there. No praise. No congratulations. Holloway's gaze settled on Lucas first. You finished strong. Lucas waited. For more. Then Holloway turned to Ethan. You turned back. Yes, sir. A pause stretched between them, thick as ice. Why? Holloway asked. Ethan didn't look away. Because he was drowning. Holloway studied him for a long moment, then addressed the class. You are here to become weapons, he said. But weapons without restraint are liabilities. Strength without judgment will fail you when it matters most. His eyes flicked briefly to Lucas. Dismissed. Lucas said nothing as they walked back to the barracks. But something in him had shifted. In the days that followed, the tension sharpened. Lucas trained harder, faster, as if trying to outrun an invisible line. He began correcting Ethan unnecessarily, challenging small decisions, offering advice no one had asked for. His words remained polite, professional, but the space between them widened. Ethan noticed Rook during those days too. The German shepherd was still young then, black and tan, all coiled energy and instinct. His ears were always alert, eyes constantly searching. Rook had a peculiar habit, pausing before certain drills, tugging lightly at Ethan's gear, whining softly as if sensing danger before it announced itself. Some of the men laughed. Ethan listened. One evening, just before a night drill, Rook refused to move. He planted himself in front of Ethan, body rigid, eyes fixed on the dark path ahead. When Ethan knelt, the dog pressed his forehead against Ethan's chest, hard, deliberate, then released him. Moments later, a support beam along the route collapsed under another trainee. No injuries, no explanation. The instructors dismissed it as chance. Ethan did not. The final assessment was announced without ceremony. A composite trial, distance swimming, submerged obstacles, navigation under stress. It would determine who would be recommended for the command track. The night before, Lucas found Ethan alone by the lockers. "You don't belong behind me," Lucas said quietly. Ethan looked up. "Neither do you." Lucas clenched his jaw. "I've done everything right." "That's not the same thing," Ethan replied. Lucas turned away. They entered the water before dawn. The sea was calmer than expected, deceptively smooth. Ethan felt the injury before he understood it. A sharp bite as his hand brushed a jagged edge inside his gear pouch. Blood bloomed instantly, dark against pale water. He sealed his fist, kept moving. Behind him, Lucas saw the red. He hesitated, then he kept going. Minutes later, the current shifted violently. Lucas misjudged the pull. Cold seized his muscles. Panic flared. He began to sink. Through blurred vision, he saw a shape turn. Ethan. Their eyes met beneath the surface. In that moment, Lucas understood something he had refused to see. That leadership was not about reaching the line first, but knowing when to stop chasing it. Ethan grabbed him, steady, unhesitating. They surfaced, gasping. When it ended, Lucas stood wrapped in a thermal blanket, shaking. Ethan emerged last, alive. No applause followed, but something settled into place. The competition had found its answer, and neither of them had truly won. The exercise ended without ceremony, but nothing truly ended that day. The trainees dispersed across the compound in disciplined silence, boots crunching against packed snow, breath rising in short, controlled bursts. The sea beyond the perimeter fence continued its steady assault on the rocks, indifferent to what had almost been lost beneath its surface. Ethan Walker sat alone on a low concrete step near the barracks, towel draped over his shoulders, wet hair dark against his forehead. His body still trembled, not from fear, but from the delayed arrival of cold, the kind that waited until danger had passed before claiming its due. Rook lay at his feet. The German shepherd was still young, not yet fully grown into the breadth he would one day carry, but already solid and alert. His black and tan coat was damp at the edges. Fur clumped where ice crystals had begun to form. He rested his chin on his paws, amber eyes tracking every movement around Ethan, ears flicking at distant sounds. Calm now, watchful, as if his work for the day was done, but his duty was not. Across the yard, Lucas Reed stood surrounded by a few other trainees. He had finished first. That much was undeniable. His chest rose and fell heavily beneath his thermal layer, muscles still charged with exertion. His hair was plastered to his head, water darkened and rigid with cold. A faint cut marked one cheek, already beginning to redden. He looked exactly like what the program was designed to produce. Sharp, relentless, unbroken. And yet, something in his posture betrayed him. Lucas waited. Not for warmth, not for instruction, for recognition. Commander Grant Holloway stood near the edge of the training field, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping over the group. The wind tugged at his coat, but he did not adjust it. He never did. His presence was as fixed as the compound itself. "You completed the course," Holloway said, voice carrying easily over the open ground. "That is noted." Lucas straightened slightly. Holloway did not look at him. He turned instead toward the medics, who were loading Private Mark Sullivan onto a transport sled. The young man's face was pale, lips tinged blue, but his chest rose steadily beneath the thermal blanket. "He is alive," Holloway continued. "That is also noted." The pause that followed was deliberate. "You were given a choice out there," Holloway said, addressing the entire class. "Most of you will face versions of it again. Some of you already have." His gaze settled briefly, precisely on Lucas. "Strength without judgment is not leadership," Holloway said. "It is acceleration. And acceleration without direction only gets you lost faster." No applause followed. No dismissal of guilt or pride, just silence. Lucas's jaw tightened. Later, in the locker room, the tension found its voice. Metal doors clanged open and shut. Wet gear hit benches with dull thuds. Steam curled upward from exhausted bodies meeting warm air. Lucas stood at his locker, movements sharp, efficient. He peeled off his gloves, flexed his fingers once, then reached for a towel. "You didn't have to turn back," he said, not looking at Ethan. Ethan sat on the opposite bench, unlacing his boots slowly. His hands were steady now. "Yes," he replied. "I did." Lucas scoffed under his breath. "You cost yourself position." Ethan looked up. His expression was calm, but there was no softness in it. "If that's what you think position is." Lucas turned then, eyes flashing. "Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't care." "I care," Ethan said evenly. "Just not about the same things." The words landed harder than a shove. For a moment, Lucas looked as if he might say something else, something sharper, more honest. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and walked out, shoulders rigid, pride pulling him forward like a leash. From that day on, the fracture became visible. Lucas remained professional, courteous even. He offered suggestions during drills, corrections during team exercises. On the surface, nothing was wrong, but the edge was there. Every glance held comparison. Every success carried an unspoken tally. Every moment Ethan earned trust, from instructors, from teammates, settled somewhere in Lucas's chest like unfinished business. Ethan felt it, but he did not engage. He had learned long ago that some battles fed themselves if given attention. Rook, however, did not ignore it. During high-risk drills, the dog began exhibiting a pattern. He would slow Ethan just slightly, tugging at his harness, stepping into his path, whining low when the environment felt wrong. Not enough to disrupt training, just enough to create space. On 3 separate occasions, the men directly ahead of Ethan encountered equipment failure. A snapped line, a loose rung, a misjudged step. No serious injuries, no official notes. But Lieutenant Cole Harris noticed. Harris was younger than Holloway, late 30s, with a compact build and eyes that missed very little. His hair was kept short, regulation, his beard perpetually trimmed to the edge of acceptability. He had the look of a man who had seen enough to be skeptical, but not enough to be cynical. After one drill, Harris stopped Ethan near the obstacle course. "That dog," Harris said, nodding toward Rook, who sat calmly a few feet away. "He's not just trained. He's thinking." Ethan said nothing. Harris watched Lucas across the yard, where he was finishing a set of pull-ups, well past requirement. "You hold people together," Harris said quietly. "Reed tries to pull ahead." Ethan followed his gaze. "Both have their place." Harris shook his head. "Only one keeps a team alive." The final evaluation was announced 2 days later. A composite trial, multi-stage, designed not just to test endurance, but decision-making under cumulative stress. It would determine command recommendations. The night before the trial, Lucas noticed something. They were checking gear in the dim light of the staging area, wind rattling the canvas walls. Ethan reached into his pack, fingers brushing past a metal edge where fabric should have been reinforced. Lucas saw it, a jagged seam, small, easy to miss, easy to mention. He opened his mouth, then closed it. It wasn't sabotage. He hadn't caused it, but warning Ethan would slow him, shift the balance, remove the margin Lucas had chased for years. So he said nothing. As they moved toward the waterline, Rook stopped abruptly and turned toward Lucas instead of Ethan. The dog stared at him, longer than usual, deeper, not aggressive, not fearful, as if asking a question Lucas didn't know how to answer. For the first time, Lucas felt something twist in his gut that had nothing to do with competition. The trial began before dawn. Cold wrapped around them like a living thing. The sea accepted them without comment. Halfway through the water phase, Ethan felt the injury, the sharp bite in his hand, the bloom of blood. He compensated, adjusted grip, kept moving. Small shapes darted beneath the surface, minor predators, drawn not by fear, but by instinct. Lucas saw it all, and he kept going, until the current shifted, until his own body betrayed him, until the water pressed in, heavy and unforgiving, and the truth surfaced alongside panic. He was alone. Then Ethan was there, hands steady, eyes clear, no hesitation. When Lucas finally reached shore, wrapped in a thermal blanket, shame burned hotter than the cold. Holloway addressed the group later. Completion was recorded, he said. Performance was noted. His gaze moved to Lucas. You finished first. Then to Ethan. You finished last. A pause. And yet, Holloway continued, only one of you acted like a commander. Lucas did not look up. Ethan was not mentioned again. That night, Lucas sat alone on the edge of the compound, staring out at the dark water. The cheers he had imagined never came. The victory felt thin, hollow. For the first time, he understood something that frightened him. He had won the trial and lost himself. The final assessment arrived without drama. No speeches, no build-up. Just a time stamped on a board and a list of names beneath it. Ethan Walker read it once and walked away. Lucas Reed stood longer, eyes fixed on the paper as if it might change if he stared hard enough. This was it. The command trial. The exercise everyone pretended not to want, while secretly measuring themselves against it from the first day of training. By then, winter had fully claimed the northern coast. Snow lay packed and old, hardened by weeks of wind. The sea beyond the compound was darker than usual, its surface broken by irregular swells that reflected little light. Cold did not announce itself anymore. It simply existed, constant, unavoidable. They assembled before dawn. Thermal layers. Full gear. Faces stripped of expression. Commander Grant Holloway stood apart from the formation, posture unchanged, eyes moving slowly across the line. Beside him waited Lieutenant Cole Harris, arms folded, jaw tight. He looked less like an observer today and more like a witness. This is not a race, Holloway said at last. His voice was even, carrying without effort. It is not a test of speed. It is a test of judgment under cumulative stress. No one moved. You will enter the water in pairs, Holloway continued. Distant swim, submerged obstacles, navigation under load. You finish together or you don't finish at all. Lucas's jaw flexed. Together. Ethan stood 2 positions away, gaze forward, breathing slow. Rook sat behind the line, handlerless for the trial, his young body coiled with restless focus. His ears tracked every shift of wind, every footstep on frozen ground. Lucas glanced back once. The dog was watching him, not accusing, not warning, remembering. They entered the water just as the first light cut across the horizon. Cold wrapped around Ethan immediately, but it was a familiar sensation. Sharp, honest, demanding discipline rather than panic. He set his pace early, long controlled strokes, conserving energy. He felt the drag of equipment, adjusted instinctively. Lucas surged ahead, not recklessly, not sloppy, but deliberately. He wanted distance. He wanted separation. Halfway through the submerged obstacle phase, Ethan felt the tear. A sudden resistance where there should have been none. The fabric of his glove split against a jagged edge inside his pack. Pain flared sharp and immediate. Blood bloomed into the water. Dark, unmistakable. Ethan sealed his fist, slowed his kick by a fraction, shifted technique. He had learned long ago how to move when injured, how to keep function even when the body protested. Small shapes flickered at the edge of his vision. Minor predators, drawn by motion, by blood. Nothing lethal on their own, but nothing harmless either. Lucas saw it. He saw the red cloud. He saw Ethan compensate. And he understood, with brutal clarity, what it meant. If Ethan slowed, Lucas would win. No one would question it. No one would know about the torn gear, about the blood. This wasn't betrayal. It was opportunity. Lucas told himself that commanders couldn't afford sentiment, that the mission always came first, that Ethan would understand. So he kept going. The current shifted 20 meters later. What had felt manageable turned treacherous without warning. Water pulled sideways, then down, twisting Lucas's body out of alignment. Cold seized his muscles, locking breath in his chest. Panic flared. Not loud, not dramatic, but sudden and disorienting. Lucas tried to correct, overcompensated. The sea took advantage. His kick lost rhythm. His lungs burned. For the first time in the trial, he stopped thinking ahead. He was just trying not to sink. Through the distortion of water and fear, he saw movement. Someone turning back. Ethan. Their eyes met beneath the surface. In that moment, something in Lucas broke. Not his body, but the belief he had carried for years. The idea that leadership meant never slowing down, never looking back. Ethan reached him without hesitation. No anger, no reproach, just action. He locked an arm beneath Lucas's shoulder, stabilized his breathing, signaled upward. Lucas fought the instinct to struggle, then forced himself to follow. They surfaced, gasping, waves slapping hard against their faces. Ethan released him, pointed toward shore. "Go," he said, voice raw but steady. Lucas hesitated, just long enough to understand the cost of what he was doing, then swam. Behind him, Ethan stayed. Blood continued to trail from his hand. His movement slowed, but he did not stop. He kept breathing, kept counting strokes, kept himself alive the way he always had, quietly, stubbornly. Rook barked sharply from shore, the sound cutting through wind and surf. Not frantic, insistent. When Lucas collapsed onto the sand, hands shaking uncontrollably, medics were already there. Thermal blanket, firm voices, efficient movements. Commander Holloway watched without expression. Then his gaze shifted, past Lucas, back to the water. Ethan emerged last. His face was pale, lips tight, body trembling violently now that the fight was over. He made it 3 steps onto the sand before his knees buckled. Rook was there instantly. The dog pressed his body against Ethan's side, grounding him, warmth against cold, presence against collapse. As the medics worked, Rook lifted his head and stared straight at Lucas, not with accusation, but with something closer to understanding. Lucas realized, with a hollow ache, that the dog had known long before he had which choice mattered. The results were posted that evening. Lucas Reed. Completed. Highest performance metrics. Ethan Walker. Completed. No recommendation listed. No explanation followed. No ceremony. Lieutenant Harris found Ethan later, sitting alone near the edge of the compound, Rook at his side. "You won't see your name up there," Harris said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I didn't expect to." Harris studied him for a long moment. "Command isn't always assigned," he said. "Sometimes it's recognized." Ethan said nothing. Across the yard, Lucas stood staring at the board again. The numbers meant nothing now. The position felt weightless. Victory had never felt so empty. That night, sleep did not come easily. For either of them. The morning after the trial arrived without answers. No announcement, no clarification, just routine, sharp, unyielding, indifferent. The compound woke as it always did. Boots hit concrete. Breath steamed and vanished. Orders were given, followed, forgotten. The sea beyond the perimeter moved on, unmoved by who had nearly drowned for whom. Lucas Reed stood alone near the far edge of the yard, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his issued jacket. He had not slept, not because of nightmares, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing, red drifting through dark water, and someone turning back. Lucas was officially declared the top performer by midday. No ceremony, just a line on a report. A nod from Commander Holloway that lasted barely a second. "You finished strong," Holloway said. Lucas nodded automatically. The words felt thin. Ethan Walker's name was never mentioned. Not in praise, not in criticism, not at all. That silence was worse. Lucas watched Ethan from a distance that afternoon. Ethan moved slower than usual, favoring one hand, but his posture was unchanged, straight, uncomplaining. Rook stayed close to him, the young German shepherd never more than a step away, amber eyes alert, ears tracking everything. The dog had not looked at Lucas since the trial. That hurt more than it should have. Lieutenant Cole Harris noticed. Harris was younger than Holloway, early 40s, lean and sharp-eyed. He had the posture of someone still capable of leading from the front, but the patience of someone who had learned when not to. His gaze followed Ethan longer than protocol required. "You won't hear applause for him," Harris said quietly to Lucas as they passed near the equipment shed. Lucas stopped. "Why?" Harris met his eyes. "Because the system rewards results, not costs." Then he walked on. Lucas stood there for a long time after that. The days that followed blurred together. Lucas trained harder than ever. Longer runs, colder water, heavier loads. He chased exhaustion the way he always had, believing if he went far enough, fast enough, the noise in his head would quiet. It didn't. Every success felt borrowed, every metric hollow. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling of the barracks, listening to other men breathe, shift, sleep. He flexed his hands until his fingers ached, then stopped, afraid of what would surface if he slowed. Across the compound, Ethan slept. Not deeply, not well. But when he did, it was without fighting it. That difference haunted Lucas. 3 days after the trial, Lucas found himself standing outside the medical wing without remembering walking there. Ethan was seated on a bench near the side entrance, jacket pulled tight, Rook lying at his feet. The dog lifted his head when Lucas approached, but did not stand. Not hostile, not welcoming, aware. "You should have reported the injury," Lucas said, voice low. Ethan looked up slowly. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "I did. After." Lucas swallowed. "I mean before." "I know." Silence stretched. "I didn't warn you," Lucas said finally. "No," Ethan agreed. The word landed clean. No anger, no softness. Lucas clenched his jaw. "I saw it. The tear. I knew what it meant." Ethan nodded once. "I figured." "Why didn't you say anything?" Lucas demanded, the frustration breaking through despite himself. "You could have changed your decision," Ethan finished calmly. Lucas faltered. Ethan continued, "That wouldn't have helped either of us." Rook shifted, pressing closer to Ethan's leg, his presence steady, grounding. Lucas exhaled, shoulders sagging slightly for the first time in days. "I won," he said bitterly, "and it feels wrong." Ethan studied him, not as a rival, not as a teammate, but as a man standing at a fracture point. "Then maybe you didn't win what you thought you were racing for," Ethan said. Rook rose unexpectedly and stepped toward Lucas. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply sat in front of him and held his gaze, steady and unflinching. Lucas felt something loosen in his chest, a quiet acknowledgement he had been avoiding. The moment passed. Rook returned to Ethan's side. Lucas laughed once, shaky. "Your dog has terrible timing." "Or perfect," Ethan replied. They sat in silence for a while. Lucas broke it. "I kept thinking leadership meant being first, being untouchable." "And now?" Ethan asked. Lucas stared at his hands. "Now I know it means living with what you leave behind." That night, Lucas requested a transfer review. Not out of ambition, out of necessity. The paperwork took time. Questions were asked, files were reopened. Some answers came back incomplete, but one thing was clear. Lucas Reed would advance, and it would never sit cleanly with him. 2 days later, Lucas found Ethan again, this time near the shoreline, wind cutting sharp across the water. Rook paced the sand, calmer now, older somehow. "I owe you an apology," Lucas said without preamble. Ethan looked out at the sea. "For what?" "For choosing myself," Lucas said, "and for pretending it was the same as choosing the mission." Ethan turned to face him. "You already paid for that choice." Lucas nodded. "I know." A pause. "And thank you," Lucas added, "for not letting me become the kind of man who would have lived with that win." Ethan considered him for a long moment. Then he said, "Just don't make me come save you again." Lucas laughed. Quiet, real, deal. The past didn't vanish. It rarely did. But for the first time, it loosened its grip. Some victories followed you. Others taught you how to stop running. The northern beach looked different in the late afternoon. Not softer, not kinder, just honest in a way that only places shaped by wind and time could be. Low sunlight slid across the water, turning the waves into long bands of steel blue and silver. The cold had eased, but it had not left. It lingered in the sand, in the air, in the bones of anyone who had spent enough winters listening to this sea breathe. Ethan Walker stood near the waterline, boots planted firmly, hands relaxed at his sides. He was 35 now. Taller than most, lean without excess, his strength compact and quiet. His face was clean-shaven, the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones fully exposed, weathered by years of cold wind and salt. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, just a touch longer than regulation, as if he had allowed himself that single, silent defiance. His gray-blue eyes watched the horizon without urgency. They had learned patience the hard way. Beside him stood Rook. The German shepherd was 5 years old, black and tan, broad-backed and powerful without heaviness. His posture was calm, ears relaxed but responsive, tail hanging loose. His amber-brown eyes tracked movement along the waterline, then flicked back to Ethan as if checking in. Rook had always done that, not for permission, but for alignment. They had walked this beach together for years, after the uniform, after the noise, after the need to be first. Footsteps approached from behind. Ethan didn't turn immediately. He recognized the rhythm. Lucas Reed stopped a few steps away, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. The wind tugged at his coat, ruffling hair that had once been kept immaculate by regulation. He looked older now than he had during training. Not weaker, just more worn around the edges. Lucas was still tall, still broad-shouldered, his build dense and athletic. His jaw remained strong, but the constant tension that once lived there had eased. A faint scar marked his forearm, pale against skin, darkened by years of sun and cold. His eyes, sharp and restless by nature, carried something new now. Hesitation, maybe, or reflection. He cleared his throat. "You always pick the quiet hours." Ethan turned then, studying him. "They're easier to hear?" Lucas gave a short, humorless laugh. "You were always good at that." They stood in silence, the sea filling the space between them. Rook shifted slightly, stepping forward so that he stood between the two men, not blocking, not guarding, just present, balanced, as if he belonged equally to both moments, the past and whatever came next. Lucas noticed. He always noticed Rook. "He hasn't decided to bite me yet," Lucas said lightly. "That means you're improving," Ethan replied. Lucas smiled at that, small, genuine, the kind of smile that didn't try to win. They walked together along the shoreline, their pace unhurried. The sand was firm beneath their boots, damp from the receding tide. "I leave tomorrow," Lucas said after a while. Ethan nodded. "Figured." "Command's still on the table," Lucas added. "Different unit, different structure." "And different rules?" Ethan asked. Lucas hesitated. "Same rules," he said. "Different understanding." They stopped near a stretch of rocks where the waves broke harder, louder. Lucas stared out at the water, hands tightening briefly in his pockets. "I used to think leadership meant standing in front," he said. "Being the one everyone followed because you were faster, stronger, willing to push further than anyone else." Ethan listened without interrupting. Lucas continued, voice quieter now. "That winter, that trial, I won on paper, but I lost something I didn't know how to name back then." Rook sat, tail curling neatly around his paws, gaze moving between the two men. "I spent years trying to outrun that feeling," Lucas said, "thinking if I kept moving, kept achieving, it would fade." "And?" Ethan asked. Lucas shook his head. "It doesn't. It waits." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sharp scent of salt and kelp. "I thought coming back here would make it worse," Lucas admitted. "Seeing you, seeing what I left behind." He glanced at Ethan, then at Rook. "But it didn't." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Lucas exhaled slowly. "Because you didn't change," he said. "You stepped away, but you didn't run. You stayed human." The word hung between them. Ethan considered it. "You're human too," he said finally. You just took longer to hear it. Lucas laughed quietly. That's one way to put it. They stood there as the sun dipped lower, light shifting from silver to gold. Rook rose suddenly. Not stiff, not alarmed, just alert. He took a few steps forward, nose lifting, ears turning toward the open water. He stared out at the horizon for a long moment, body still. Ethan felt it, a subtle tightening in his chest. Not fear, not urgency, recognition. What is it? Lucas asked softly. Ethan watched the dog, then the sea. Nothing dangerous, he said. Just something passing. Rook turned back from the water and pressed his flank briefly against Lucas's leg, mirroring the gesture he had once reserved only for Ethan. Lucas froze, breath catching, as if the weight of that simple contact carried a verdict he hadn't known he was awaiting. The moment lasted no more than a second. Rook stepped away, tail swinging once, calm restored. Lucas swallowed. I guess that's as close to forgiveness as I'm going to get. Ethan smiled faintly. From him? Yeah. They began walking back toward the path leading inland. Drink with me, Lucas said. One last time. No ranks, no scores. Ethan considered, then nodded. All right. They left the beach together as evening settled in, their footprints trailing behind them only briefly before the tide smoothed them away. At the edge of the path, Lucas stopped and looked back once more at the sea. You know, he said, I used to think losing meant being left behind. And now? Ethan asked. Now, I think losing is knowing you should have turned back and didn't. Rook waited patiently between them, ears relaxed, eyes steady. Ethan placed a hand briefly on the dog's head, then met Lucas's gaze. Some people don't win the trial, he said. They win themselves. Lucas nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that. They turned away from the shore, heading toward the quiet lights of town, where old stories waited without bitterness and new ones no longer needed to be rushed. Behind them, the northern sea rolled on, unchanged, indifferent, eternal. But the line that mattered most had finally been drawn. And this time, it would hold. Sometimes the miracle is not the wave that parts, or the storm that calms. Sometimes the miracle is the moment a heart chooses to turn back. God does not always speak in thunder or light. Often, he speaks through conscience, through instinct, through the quiet pull that tells us when another life matters more than our own pride. In our daily lives, we are all standing at our own shorelines, choosing whether to keep racing forward or to pause, to help, to become more human than we were yesterday. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder that strength guided by compassion is never weakness, and that the choices we make in silence are the ones God sees most clearly. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that heal the heart. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps wherever you are watching from.